Today's video, I want to talk about something that you've never seen demoed at any kind of event that you've ever gone to. We're going to talk about drilling. And I know, once again, like some of the other things that we've talked about in the past, drilling doesn't seem like it's that important. But you know what? It's one of the things that I see all the time on Facebook and on social media, people asking questions about. And more importantly, if done well, it's going to be something that's going to prepare us for being able to put together the rest of that pen, and it's going to be perfect. So what we're going to cover in this one is some of the big problems that I see out there. Is people ask me, well, what about blowout on the bottom of the blank? I get blowout when the drill goes through. The other thing that we'll talk about is an out of round hole. And also, why does the hole shrink up and sometimes I can't get the tube into it? So these are all the things that we're going to cover, and we're going to talk a little bit about it as we go through this video. So drilling is personal preference as to what you're going to drill it on. I typically use a drill press because I'm set up to do production mode. You can drill just as well on a lathe, but for me the drill press is the way to go because once I get it set up, I can do a lot of repetitive cuts. And some of the things that we're going to talk about, like blowout and stuff like that, it's a lot easier to see and set up for on a drill press than it is on a lathe. But once again, all the techniques that you see here, we're going to be able to put in, and you're going to be able to develop it and put it on your lathe. So let's talk a little bit about my setup. So you can see here, I love to use a jig. This is a jig that I picked up at a store, and I've got it mounted to a board. Why do I have it mounted to a board? I'm going to show you right now that it's going to make it a little bit easier for me to do all my adjustments and get it perfectly set up. So before we go into actually drilling, there's a couple things that we're going to talk about on blank preparation. So here's my blank, and what I'm going to do, this is a Vertex Supreme that I'm going to want to drill through, and you're going to see here that I'm going to take my tube, I'm simply going to place it here, I'm going to draw a little line here so that I can see where I'm going to be cutting that one, and then I'm going to test the other side, and if I wanted to cut it off a little bit here, I can cut it off a little bit here, and then you can see that's where I'm going to be drilling. So now there's a couple other things we're going to do to this blank. I'm going to draw a mark here and an arrow that way, a mark here and an arrow that way. That's going to show me that even if I put this blank down, I'll know which way I want to drill. I know that I'm going to always want to drill from the center out. And why do I want to do that? Because all this little grain that's sitting in here, if it's a wood piece, it's got grain. If it's acrylic, it's got some pattern into it. I'm going to want to maintain that when I put this pen together, so I've got something that's free flowing. A couple other things that I'll do is I might put a little witness mark on the other side of it here, and I might put a number on it, 1 and 1, so that this way if I've got a couple blanks that look the same, I'll have some marks on here to know which ones actually match up in case I mix them up in a further process. So now through the magic of television, I've now taken that blank and I've cut it. And so you can see I cut it right down on the mark. I know that this is where I want to cut that one. And you can see my line here, this is where I'm going to cut this one. So now it's set up. And a lot of people will take this and they'll put their little crosshairs on it and they'll make sure that they're going to go through and that they're going to cut this thing straight, or they're going to drill it straight in the middle. We're going to do our setup just a little bit differently. We're going to do our setup all with respect to the jig. And so I'm going to take my bit and I'm going to put it in my jig, and then we're going to line up the bit into the jig and make sure that that's all matched up. Now there's two different kinds of bits that are out there. There's the standard twist bit, and you can see that it's got a little bit of an angle on it, and what it's going to do is it cuts on the angle. And then I personally prefer brad point bits. The brad point bit has the angles on there and wings, but it also has a little piloting hole that's going to always assure that the brad point bit is drilling its way straight through and going straight down, and I can chase it that way a little bit easier. So they both work just as effectively as the other one, but I like to use the brad point bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to take my brad point bit, I'm going to chuck it up, I'm going to make sure that it's tight in there, and now, as I said, I want to center it on the jig itself. So what I'll do is I'll close up my jig, and now I got the brad point to actually act as my center. So now when I move the handle down, I can see I'm off a little bit, so now I'll line it up right there. I know that I'm perfect now in both dimensions, so I'm going to lock it in. Now, first question we talked about earlier is, how do I avoid blowout? Well, blowout's real easy. Blowout's going to happen when the bit exits this hole, and no matter what I have as a backer sitting on it, If the backer is not perfectly adjusted to it, you're going to get blowout on it, because what's going to happen is the bit's going to pop through and then explode on going through. So the easiest thing to do is we're not going to drill all the way through. What we're going to do is we're going to set up our drill bit so that we're about a 1/16 of an inch shy of actually drilling through. And then what we'll do is we'll go back to our bandsaw and cut that off, and we are going to have the perfect hole sitting there. So now I'll just simply roll this out. I'll move this down to where it bottoms out, so now I know that that's where it's going to be. Now I can use the little gauge, move it up about a 1/16 of an inch, lock it in, and now that I know that all my repetitive cuts that I'm going to do here, none of them are going to go through the bottom, and never will I see blowout on it. So now we're ready to go. So there is a couple different techniques that we're going to talk about, and it's going to depend on what you're drilling. If you're drilling acrylic, you know, if you've watched any of my other videos or you've seen me demo, you know that what I advocate is painting the hole when we're done. And paint takes up a little bit of space. So what we want to do is make sure that when we have the tube and we're putting it into the hole, we're not actually scratching it up. So what are we going to do? We're going to over drill. And what do I mean by over drilling? Well, instead of using on a 7mm drill bit, I'm going to use a 9/32. That's going to give me just a little bit of more room for the paint to go into it and be able to adhere, so that when I'm putting the tube in, I'm not scratching the paint off. Now I've actually found that on some of the bigger drill bits, like the 10.5mm or the 12.5mm, that I don't ever really have to go through that step, because there's enough gap in there that I don't have to worry about it. But on an acrylic, I'm always going to worry about that step, especially as I'm doing the smaller drill bits. So now what I'm going to do is I've got the mark on here and I know where I'm going to put it in. So I'll simply put it in. I'll lock it down, and now I can start my cut. Speed is really important. I typically go at the fastest that the drill is going to go. But more importantly, it's clearing out the drill bit. So I'm only going to go in at about a 1/4 of an inch, then I'm going to clear the drill bit out. Then I'm going to go down and I'm going to drill another 1/4 of an inch, and I'm going to clear the drill bit out. You're going to hear me say this 2 or 3 times, but the thing that affects drilling the most and hurts your drilling is heat and heat buildup. We do not want to build up heat as we're going into it. And I'm going to admit, when I was younger, I used to have a water bottle here, and when I was drilling my acrylics, I would drill in, drill out, and then I would essentially quench the drill bit by pouring a little bit of water into it. Works perfectly fine, and if you want a tip for how to do it, that works just great. But I'm going to tell you that as long as you keep clearing in and clearing out, you're going to have no problem with it, and your drill is going to go straight through it, and we're going to minimize the amount of heat that we're going to have. So I'm going to have a little cutaway in about, maybe about 30 seconds. We'll talk a little bit about a cutaway, and then you'll see how I'm going to handle out of round and other things with the acrylic. Wood is the same thing. In wood, I'm going to go in, I'm going to pull out, and make sure that I am not taking too deep of a cut at any one time, because we don't want to be burning the wood as we're going through. And I've actually smoked wood when I was actually putting it into the drill and pushing it down, that you could actually see the smoke coming out of it. So when we talk a little bit about how we're going to do the drilling on the wood, once again, what did I say is the most important thing? It's heat buildup, and why heat buildup is going to be important to you. So before we do the cutaway, let's talk a little bit about the drilling. So in this case, I'm going to drill all the way down, and I'm going to drill all the way back up. In the case, though, that I don't have enough stroke on my drill press to actually go all the way down and come all the way back up, the technique is simply, I'm going to take my blank, and assume that it's a longer blank, something like this, or some of the other kits that require some of the longer ones, is that I'm going to drill, and I've seen people drill as far down as you can, and then flip the bit over, and then drill in. Now the reason you don't want to go down as far as you can is because now if that area where it's not going to, if it doesn't match up perfectly, we don't want it near an end. Because you'll see that when I put the tube in there, I'll see a little bit of play around there, and I don't want that around the end, because typically that's where it's going to go down to the end, and that's where you're going to be able to see through it. I'm going to want it in the middle. So when I drill, and I know that I've got to flip this around and drill from the other end, I'm going to drill it down to the halfway point here, then I'm going to pull it out of here, and I'm going to rotate it either clockwise or counterclockwise, but with the same edge always facing me, and then I'm going to drill down through the other end and have it match up. And then this way, if where there's a little bit of play in there is matching up in the middle, the brass tube's going to take care of that. You don't have to worry about that one. You don't have to worry about it going through and not matching up. So let's do the cutaway, and let's talk a little bit about what's going to happen before we do, during this cutaway. You're going to see that when we do the cutaway, if I am not clearing, you're going to see acrylic, and acrylic shards are going to be spinning around the blank. That's what's going to cause your hole not to be perfectly round, because those shards are going to build up heat on the top end of your blank, and when it's going in, it's actually either doing one of two things. It's actually melting the top end so that hole is expanding, or those little shards are actually acting on the drill bit itself, making the drill bit a little bit longer, and those little shards are actually cutting into your drill bit, and you see that it's going to expand. So let's take a look at that, and let's do a little quick cutaway. So hopefully you could see on that cutaway what happens when those shards build up in there and actually make the hole a little bit rounder. So a couple other things that can cause out a round hole is any kind of chatter that I actually have up in here. The other thing is worn out or dull drill bits. And dull drill bits are, you know, I think we can all tell when our drill bit is dull. When I'm actually putting way too much force on my handle to get the handle to go down, we know that we have a problem with that one. And it's even worse on wood, because wood, there's actually soft grain and hard grain, and you can see the grain as you're going through. That drill bit's going to want to follow the path of least resistance. So if it's trying to drill in, even though I've got it incredibly secure here and I've got it incredibly secure here, as it's going through, it's going to drift just a hair to follow the softer part. Well, if the drill bit is dull, that drift is going to stay there, and we're going to drift. And that's why you can, you know, I've put blanks in here, I've looked at them, and I know that I've got them perfectly centered on the top, and then when I pull them out of the bottom, I'm off. And it can be a significant amount of spot that I'm off. And it's simply because of the fact that I've got grain drift when I've had it in here. And then we've talked about the other thing, right, is heat buildup. Heat buildup not only causes the hole to expand, but then on wood, you know, one of the other things we talked about is why does the hole shrink? Well, wood, if you look at it, even though it's dried, it's still at 7, maybe even 8% moisture. And when we're putting the drill bit through it, if I've got excessive amount of heat, it's drying up all the moisture that's sitting in that drill bit. Then when I put that pen blank down and I let it dry and get back into the environment that it is, it's going to wick back in just a hair of moisture. That's going to cause it to then shrink back up. So even though wood is dried and it's kiln dried, it does have moisture in there, and I don't want to have excessive heat and bringing that drill bit in and out of it rapidly and causing all that heat. One final tip and trick is I love segmented wood blanks, and these are pretty much the hardest thing to drill. And the reason that they're hard is that I want to make sure that I maintain this pattern all the way through the blank when I'm doing it. So what I will do is I will wind up, this time I will actually cut the drill blank where I want it. I'll actually mark it off, and then I might take a 1/16 of an inch drill bit and I'll drill that through first. What does that do? That gives the spot where this brad point will always be chasing straight down that hole, and the odds of that hole deflecting are much less than the odds of a bigger hole deflecting. So it's just one of the little tips and tricks that you might want to use and save yourself a nice segmented blank. So then the final thing that I see all the time on social media is, you know, I got my blank stuck in the pen. What do I do? Or I got my blank stuck, I got the drill bit stuck in the blank. What do I do? And I've seen everybody comment on it. Put it in a freezer. Put it in a microwave. Well, you wouldn't want to put it in a microwave, but you know what? Put it in a freezer. Put 10W40 on it. Pull it out. Twist it in. Hold it really tight in your drill press. I personally tell you that the thing that I think you should do is just break the blank and save your drill bit. It is a little bit of punishment, but I'm going to tell you it's a great reminder of why you don't want to do it again the next time. So I have not found anything that's foolproof that allows me to pull that thing out without A, wrecking the hole, or B, wrecking the drill bit. You don't want to be pulling and tugging on that drill bit a lot, or putting it in a vise and trying to hammer it off, which I've seen people talk about. You're going to bend it. and then you're going to have out of round holes from that point going forward. So with that, I think I've covered everything I wanted to cover. Hopefully this helps. If you have any questions or comments, always feel free to put it below. If you want to give me a like or a subscribe, I always appreciate that. And in these videos, what I try to do is topics that I think I can cover in 10 minutes. So if there's another topic that you would really like me to cover, or anything that you really have questions on, please let me know, and I promise you I'll take a look at it. I'll try to answer your questions, or if there's a topic you want me to handle, let me know, and I'll handle that topic and create a video. With that, I thank you for the time. Hope to see you again. This video made possible by the fine folks at Exotic Blanks. For all your pen making needs, Exotic Blanks has you covered. Find them at www.exoticblanks.com. And also by Pen Makers International, the educational source for pen making.